Welcome to the Eonics podcast, a podcast about software engineering, new ways of working, and lots of other interesting topics. Today we have a new guest, I think. Were you ever on the podcast, Yobyn?
Second time.
Second time? What was the first topic?
Will be my second time. Spring security.
Yeah, now I remember. Yeah. So if you look in our archives for Spring security, you will find another interesting topic. Yobyn Roetz, right? But maybe for the listeners who hear you for the first time, you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Yobyn Roetz. I've been working for Eonics almost now a year now. I'm situated at a client called Delta Fiber. Enjoying it very much at the client currently. Yes, I've got 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and I'm married to a lovely wife. And I do Java development and loving it.
A real Java engineer. That's what we like on this podcast. Recently, you also did an Eonics Open Hack Night. Those are events we host every once in a while where we get together, we eat some food, and we talk about some interesting topic. We have a workshop, and you did one on something quite surprising. I had actually never heard of it. Aspect-oriented programming, right? In Spring.
Yeah, Spring AOP, aspect-oriented programming. That is something that I see. It's an old technology, but it's still workable or feasible for me, and it's something that's very overlooked. So that's how I think it's a good idea to have a hack night of it. So it's a refresher basically for all developers out there to maybe look into it.
Yeah, so it's not like a shiny new thing, but actually something a bit older, but it's still very useful.
Correct, yes.
And what is the use case? When do you apply aspect-oriented programming? Why do you use it?
So the key word is the cross-cutting concerns. So it's in the phrase where you have, say for Spring, you have security or you have transactional things that's running in between your business logic, which shouldn't technically speaking be there, but it's still needed for your application to run. So you have these things that can run in the background, like your security check, see if the user that is logged in does have the right privileges to access the service or function, basically whatever you wanted to access in your application, but without checking for it, it does it in the background. So you can focus on your business logic instead of worrying about checking if you're logging all the necessary information, you have your security checks and things like that.
Great. So not your business logic, but all the other topics basically that could be important.
Yeah, that's essential basically for your application to run.
Right. But something that was also mentioned during the Hack Night is often there are already tools in the Spring library for those kind of things, right? Like logging and these kind of things. So what is like maybe a real use case, like an example where you would actually use it, or like a certain problem that you might have encountered where you're like, oh, this is where AOP might actually be useful?
Yeah, so you have technologies that are out there that makes use of logging, but still, if you have like a controller and you get in specific parameters that's coming in, like variables, you get a username or an address, a postal code, you still want to log that. But you don't want to log it in your controller because you want to log it for all controllers or all endpoints, Swagger endpoints. This is something where AOP comes into play. So AOP will make use of the logging technology, logging it to Datadog or just a console. You still will make use of, you can still make use of AOP.
And can you tell something about how you actually use it? Like, what does it look like in practice?
So how we currently are using it is basically in that scenario to log controllers and have it as an around effect. I don't want to go into technical detail, like I said, but you basically get in the request, you manage it, and then you print it out again. So you have in a scenario that happens before your target runs, and something that happens afterwards.
So
you get your information that's in and how it was manipulated, basically.
Right. And what I remember from the Hack Night is that you have what is that called again? Those different types of
five different advice types.
Advice types, right? Because that's how you implement it, right? With the advice.
Correct.
And
yes, 100% correct.
You have, let me see, you have before, after returning, after throwing, after, and around. So that's basically talking about.
Hold on, you listen.
Yeah, that's how you, or how would you describe it? Like when you intercept kind of the call, right? That's what it's talking about.
Correct. Before you execute your target or your business logic code. The algorithm that basically runs for your business logic the before tag will execute the advice piece of code will run before you run your business logic. So yeah, like was mentioned, the before tag is perfect to use for security purposes. Before you execute, save a transaction to a database or anything in that regard, you can first check, does the person that's requesting the saving of this transaction to the database have the necessary rights, and is it allowed to save this kind of transactions and things like that. So you can do quite a few checks before you're actually saving this transaction, for example.
Yes, and then with the after returning, after throwing, and after, that's all about running something after the business logic has run, right?
Yes.
Basically.
So after you save the transactions, what will the new balance be, or things like that? If there was an exception thrown when trying to save this transaction, do we notify the necessary parties and things? So this is not part of your business flow, but it will still be, done.
And what is the last one? Around? I remember you saying in the presentation, like, you shouldn't use it actually because it's too powerful.
Yes, you can use it, but you should use it because you don't have to use the other advices. If you can use the before advice, it's preferable. If your scenario or your needs is just to make sure that something triggers before you run your target, you're saving your transaction for this in this scenario, in this case, then you shouldn't be using them around. The before will cater or will suffice for using that specific advice. So the around advice is powerful, but only when you want to execute something before your target and after your target.
Yeah, right. So it's like use the, how do you say that? Like use the least privileged tool for the job kind of situation.
Yes.
Only use around when you really, really, really need it.
Exactly. Yeah, the reason behind that is because you get a lot of power in your hands, and instead of the Spring or the proxy delegating to your target or making sure that your target gets executed, it is up to the person, the developer in this scenario, to make sure that your target or your piece of business logic gets executed. If the developer doesn't call the necessary from all processes, it will not call your target. So that's something that might slip through and can cause a big headache for other developers if this advice is running before your piece of code.
Right. And the way you actually implement those pieces of code that are run before, after, or whatever is with annotations, right?
Correct. There's two ways of doing it. You can either do it with annotations or you can do it with XML configuration.
Right. And the difference is, I think we talked about it also in the Hack Night. Some people were commenting, like, if you do it in XML, you can define them all like in a central location. So that might be useful.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, but you use some of the compiler time, error checking, and those kind of things.
Correct. So it's ideal, but then it's split from your code. So
Right.
from the round advice, it can be all over. You can have your advices on any packages. That's not good coding practice. Obviously, good coding practice to have all your advices in one package called aspects. But if unfortunately, if you have, say, uneducated, I don't want to call it uneducated developers that do not know where your aspect should be located, then it can be mixed into your other classes. But with your config, you have a dedicated location for that XML, and then everything is in one location, yes. But the primary reason for using XML configurator is if you want to have your config separated from your code. That's the primary reason for using XML configuration. So that is still being used today, but the presentation was mostly focused on annotations. It just makes it simpler for the workshop, and it's a bit simpler to implement.
But if you would use it in real life, you would usually use it through XML.
It depends on how in depth you want to utilize your advices. So if you have a lot of advices, then yes, I would use XML. But if you only have one or two advices running, then annotations is for me the way to go.
And why do you think that people don't really know this technology anymore, or why people don't use it?
I think it's something that would say there's so many new. Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay.
There's so many new technologies coming out that I think it gets bombarded. So, and it's not really needed in essence with the newer frameworks that's coming out. But it still can be utilized and it is still being utilized. We just don't know it.
Right. Yeah, I think you also mentioned in the workshop that internally Spring also uses it a lot, like in the libraries and stuff.
Exactly. So we don't. So for me, it's good to know that it's being utilized, and it's being utilized a lot with your system teams. So not all developers, 10% of the developers, if you're working in a big organization, will be making use of advices, because it's more in your commons library where it will be situated.
Right. So if you're building a library that other teams are using, maybe, or this kind of thing.
Correct. And your security and things like that. Yeah.
Right. So if people want to play with it, what would be a good place to start?
There's a lot of online tutorials. I'll share it as well. I think maybe we can add to this, and then
we also share your presentation if that's okay in the show notes.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's
because it also includes a little. You also made a GitHub, right, where people can try out some stuff.
Yes, to do the workshop. I'll upload the solution as well after this presentation.
And I was also wondering, like, okay, so maybe you're listening to this now and you're like, okay, yeah, cross-cutting concerns, Spring application. Okay, I work with Spring applications. So if you're sitting in a Scrum, someone listening to this sitting in a Scrum meeting next week, like, how would you say do you easily recognize a problem that might be good to solve with aspect-oriented programming? Just by looking at that cross-cutting concern element, or?
No, any time that someone uses the word every time we have to, then then that is the keywords we need to look out for. So every time when we log or when we make this call, we need to check if this person is logged in, or we have to log this to our logging server or something like that.
If someone uses the word every time, then you would be like, hey, maybe
it's a good candidate.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, now I'm gonna ask the stupid questions.
Yeah.
Where I will reveal that I'm not really a working programmer anymore. What is the difference between implementing something in the aspect and implementing it just in your business logic? Is it just about separating it, or is it also like a technical difference? Like, I could also write the logging inside my business logic. I mean, I can see why you don't want to, but it's possible, right? Or is it technically like different if you do it with aspects?
No, and it's exactly the same. So like we had this weaving process, not going to, but you have when you're program compiles or runs, it gets pushed into your classes exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay, so it's really all about, how do you say, like the keeping the structure of the code clean and keeping that separation of concern.
Correct.
And there's not necessarily a technical advantage of writing it in an aspect or anything.
It's more developer advantage in making sure that you have, because you don't want the same piece of code, boilerplate code, every time in your in every function. So instead of having that, you can have an advice pointing to those functions, setter functions or getter functions. Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess it's nice to keep your code clean, right? Because you don't see all those like logging or security stuff when you're just trying to understand the business logic and whatever.
100% correct, yes.
But maybe playing devil's advocate here, couldn't that be also confusing sometimes? Like you're reading, the code, and then something happens, but that something is not written there. You don't know why. Like,
yes,
that could be tricky, right?
Hey, 100% correct. Yeah, that is. So that's the majority of the time when the annotations comes into play. If you want to, so you can check for user, or if this is an admin user, so you can create your own specific annotation, custom annotations, and then then you know that this function is checking if it's an admin user. So that can replace advices, because 100% what you just pointed out is the fact that something might happen, it's blocking you, and you don't understand why. And yeah, because there's currently an advice. If you're not a non-admin user, you don't understand why you can't call this function, and it's not clear for you, and it's not in a Java doc, then yes, it can be a problem. It can block you.
But are there do the normal debugging tools still work when you use can you break like in aspects and stuff?
Yes, you can break in aspects, but yeah, you can. Correct. But you need to know that you're breaking in that aspect. You need to know what aspect is being called.
Yeah, you need to know that it's there in the first place, so you know that you might need to break there or check something out.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting. So, I think this is actually a really interesting approach, highlighting maybe a bit older technology that is actually still relevant. Maybe we should think about whether we can come up with some more of these topics, because it's always interesting how people talk about all the new technologies, and then the old stuff just kind of gets discarded, and then maybe in 10 years someone reinvents aspect-oriented programming again.
Exactly. I think it's a completely new idea. Yeah.
But did you say that in I'm not really up to date with the framework stuff, but you said something about newer frameworks. You don't really need it in newer frameworks or something?
It's less needed, if I can put it like that. It's not as high in demand or as needed to make your code clean, but it can still be utilized.
But why is it less needed? That would be my question.
So exactly with the custom annotations that you can write now. So you can write your own custom, and it's more visible for the developer that is calling it and things.
Oh, so that's in newer versions of Java, or what are we talking about exactly?
Yes, with the annotations, correct.
Okay, interesting. Is there anything that we forgot, or anything, something else that would be interesting to mention? I think we covered quite a bit.
Yeah, I think we covered everything. Not the top of my head now.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Yobyn, for sharing your knowledge again.
Thank you for having me.
And hopefully we can do this some other time.
Thank you. Thanks, Marcus.
Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.